après-midi.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to welcome some MPs who are not usual members of this committee. Mr. Couric, who's back. Is Mr. Couric here? Or he will be at some point. He's replacing Mr. Leslie and also Madam Stubbs, Goodridge, and Morris. And Mr. Weiler. So it's a bit of deja vu because Mr. Weiler and Mr. Couric were members of this committee in the past. So I'd like to say hello and welcome to our witnesses who are online, and I'm told that we have successfully completed our sound tests. And today from Suncor Energy, Rich Kruger, who is the CEO of the Imperial Company, somebody we know well, Mr. Corson, who is president of the board and president of the corporation, and Cenovus, John McKenzie, President and Chief Executive Officer, Shell Canada, Susanna Pierce, who's President for Canada and CEO, as well as Enbridge, Michelle Haradance, Executive Vice President and President, Gas Distribution and Storage. So with that, all of the witnesses will have 5 minutes to provide their remarks, and then we will have time for 3 rounds of questions, and we'll start with Mr. Kruger. You have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
I don't think Mr. Kruger's camera there.
Yeah,
okay.
I am. I'm having a little trouble with the translation, but I assume you just asked me to start.
Yes, so there's a little globe, I believe, at the bottom of the screen, and you choose the language that you wish to listen in.
I think we have it. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Very good. Before I begin, on behalf of those of us in Calgary today, I'd like to acknowledge the ancestral territory of the people of the Treaty 7 region and also the home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. While this short statement is quick and easy to make, it will take the dedicated work of all of us to make reconciliation a reality. With that, I'd like to start my comments. As an oil and gas executive with 40 years experience, I could praise the transformational virtues of hydrocarbons over the past century, convey the world's dependence on oil and gas for decades to come, recite economic contributions to Canada's prosperity, and yes, discuss the concerning effects of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. I can speak to these topics with knowledge and conviction. However, today I plan to dispel a series of myths and paint a picture of opportunity. Myth number 1, oil and gas prosperity comes at the expense of the planet. I believe this is false. Profits and the planet are not mutually exclusive, they're mutually dependent. The energy transition will take expertise, technology, and funding. Expertise in project planning and execution, which exists in the oil and gas sector. Technology, which has been a hallmark of our industry since the early days of Spindletop, or in Canada's case, Leduc, and funding from a financially strong industry coupled with government support. Myth number 2, Canadian energy companies are doing little on their own, but rather resisting the energy transition and decarbonization. I believe this is also false. Canadian companies are among the world's most committed and proactive in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, literally putting our monies where our mouths are. The companies here today, including Suncor, are spending hundreds of millions of dollars funding fuel switching and low carbon power generation projects, making investments in energy efficiency, building and operating renewable fuels plants, piloting technologies to lower emissions from in situ extraction, and collaborating to advance a globally unprecedented carbon capture and sequestration opportunity, the Oil Sands Pathways Alliance. Myth number 3, Canada can demonstrate global leadership by restricting its oil and gas sector for the benefit of the planet. This is perhaps the most concerning falsehood. The world will not consume one less barrel of oil simply because Canada chooses not to provide it. That barrel will come from somewhere else. In most cases, somewhere with less commitment to responsible development, democratic ideals, social accountability, and climate action. How do I know? I've worked in many of the countries that hold the lion's share of the world's remaining reserves. Now the opportunity. Canada is blessed with an abundance of oil and gas, number 4 globally in oil reserves, an amount Canadians couldn't consume in more than 100 years. Hence the opportunity to provide abundant, affordable, and responsibly produced energy with lower emissions to people around the world, including allies increasingly concerned about energy security, and also to millions of others who require energy to achieve a quality of life we take for granted. We can improve people's lives, increase Canada's prosperity, and help tackle climate change, a winning proposition. However, industry cannot unconditionally and unilaterally decarbonize Canada's oil and gas sector if, as a result, no one wants to invest in us or invest in Canada. It will take collaboration to create a stronger, safer, healthier, and more prosperous world with Canada as a leader in it. Industry by developing technology and investing in projects, government by developing sound public policy and the enabling regulatory framework. Sadly, neither the requisite policies or regulatory framework exist today in Canada. Throughout history, Canada has punched above its weight around the world, whether it was 80 years ago today on D-Day, with the landing at Normandy on Juno Beach, or sitting at the table shaping today's international climate accords. Canada has always been on the right side of history and has yet another opportunity to be there today. Canadians expect more from their political and business leaders than pointing fingers and clinging to ideology. They expect their leaders to roll up their sleeves and work together to address issues, tackle challenges, and capture opportunities. Issues and opportunities that will determine their grandchildren's long-term health and prosperity. If that is what this committee wants to do, I'm all in, and Suncor is all in.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Right on time. Mr. Corson, you have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. In this meeting today, and every day that Imperial carries out our business across the country, we do so on the traditional territories of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, who have lived on and cared for these lands for centuries. I and Imperial come here today fully committed to our reconciliation journey. Imperial produces oil and gas and manufactures petroleum products that are essential to Canada's energy security needs and vital to improving the standard of living for all Canadians, while significantly benefiting the Canadian economy in the form of job creation and supporting federal and provincial treasuries with substantial tax and royalty revenues. Recent years have highlighted the importance of both doing our part to provide energy supply security and taking action to reduce emissions in support of a net zero future, while growing value for our shareholders and other stakeholders. Imperial has worked diligently on emission reduction roadmaps and business plans to lower greenhouse gas intensity in our operations and provide lower life cycle emission product solutions to our customers. Our decarbonization strategy includes lowering intensity and absolute emissions at our upstream and downstream assets, lowering the emissions intensity of our products for our customers, and launching a low carbon solutions business to help others decarbonize in hard to abate sectors. I'm pleased to share that Imperial has implemented a company-wide goal to achieve net zero Scope 1 and 2 emissions from operated assets by 2050 through technology advancements and collaboration with government and our industry partners. Building on Imperial's previous success of reducing greenhouse gas intensity in our operated oil sands facilities by more than 20% between 2013 and 2016, Imperial aims to further reduce the greenhouse gas intensity of these assets by 30% compared with 2016 levels by the end of 2030. I'm pleased to note that we've already achieved approximately a 10% reduction in year-end greenhouse gas emissions intensity compared to 2016. The company is making significant progress and plans to achieve this reduction through many initiatives, including energy efficiency improvements, next-generation solvent technologies at our Cold Lake operation, using renewable diesel in our mining fleet at Kearl, and carbon capture and storage as part of our collaboration with the Pathways Alliance. Last month, we started production at our Grand Rapids project at Cold Lake using technology expected to reduce greenhouse gas emissions intensity up to 40% compared to traditional methods. We are also piloting other technologies that could reduce greenhouse gas emissions intensity by up to 90% over traditional recovery methods. Right now, we are building Canada's largest renewable diesel project at our Strathcona refinery in Edmonton, which starting next year will produce more than 1 billion liters of renewable diesel annually from locally sourced agricultural feedstocks. This renewable diesel will help reduce emissions for our customers by about 3 million metric tons per year. We are investing $720 million in this facility, which has created 600 construction jobs and could be foundational for creating a low-carbon hydrogen value chain in Alberta. Imperial is also exploring the potential for lithium from brine extraction with an eye to create a domestic supply chain of a key critical mineral for use in EV batteries. We have also tested bio-based co-processing at our refineries to deliver carbon intensity reductions in our finished products. For greater detail on these initiatives, Imperial has shared our latest Advancing Climate Solutions report with the committee. Over Imperial's 140-plus year history, some business fundamentals have not changed. The investments we make are long-term, and we operate in a global market that is subject to the cyclical nature of commodity prices. This cycle results in good years, including 2022, which was our most profitable, but that followed 2020, which was our least profitable, when Imperial reported a net loss of over $1.8 billion. Through it all, though,
sorry, Mr. Corson, I have to stop you there. We're over 5 minutes, but there'll be ample opportunity to advance your points in response to questions. We'll go now to Mr. McKenzie of Cenovus.
Great, and thank you, Mr. Chair. We appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about the work our industry is doing to help Canada meet its climate goals, while ensuring Canadians continue to enjoy a strong economy, long-term access to affordable energy, and in this increasingly unstable geopolitical environment, energy security. Cenovus is one of Canada's largest energy producers, providing well-paying jobs to about 8,500 staff. And Cenovus has been clear. We share the world's concerns about climate change. Oil and gas production contributes more than a quarter of Canada's total GHG emissions, and our industry needs to be a big part of the solution. And that's why we're a proud member of the Pathways Alliance. With expected co-investment from governments, we and our Pathways partner companies have proposed to invest over $24 billion in emission reduction projects by the end of this decade. And that's primarily for shared carbon capture and storage network, as well as individual company projects that would feed into it. Mr. Chair, we see an important role for our industry in helping secure a sustainable future for Canadians as the world transitions to a lower carbon economy. And that means reducing emissions. It also means keeping our industry strong and globally competitive for decades so that we can continue to make outsized contributions to Canada's prosperity. As you know, ours is a highly cyclical industry, and our fortunes rise and fall with the prices of natural gas and oil. In 2022, for example, oil and gas companies paid reported a net income of just over $63 billion. In that same year, though, our industry paid about $50 billion in royalties and taxes. Now compare that to 2020, when the oil prices turned negative. Our industry reported net losses of over $45 billion. There were no income taxes paid by our sector that year and less than $5 billion in royalties. So finally, look at the results from trough to peak. Over those 3 years, in aggregate, our industry reported total net income of about $53 billion. We paid 1.5 times that much in royalties and taxes, almost $80 billion. And that money helps pay for jobs, hospitals, education, social programs, and other things that contribute to Canada's high standard of living. Mr. Chair, a strong oil and gas sector is good for Canadians. We create hundreds of thousands of direct and indirect jobs and reinvest billions of dollars into Canada's economy, making our industry one of the largest investors in the country. Without oil and gas exports, the Canadian dollar would be weaker, increasing the cost of everything Canadians buy. Our industry also makes significant contributions to Indigenous communities and is one of the largest employers of Indigenous Canadians. Our energy sector is a strategic advantage for Canada and in an increasingly unstable world. Today, as the world's energy mix diversifies, every credible study shows that we will continue to need all forms of energy, including oil, to help meet the world's growing energy demand. That oil will be produced somewhere, and it should be produced in Canada, where we have some of the world's strongest regulations and industry-leading ESG performance. Mr. Chair, reducing carbon emissions is critical. And over the last 3 years, we and our industry partners have progressed multiple feasibility studies, engineering designs, environment plans, and started filing regulatory applications. And we've been advancing work on other technologies. But before we can put shovels in the ground, we need many government permits and approvals, and we need regulatory certainty and co-investment commitments. In short, Mr. Chair, a strong oil and gas industry gives Canada access to secure supplies of energy on an affordable basis, supports our dollar, and helps drive our economy. Today, Canada faces a productivity crisis, declining GDP per capita, and low business investment. A strong oil and gas industry can help get our economy back on track while we advance our work to reduce emissions. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take your questions.
Merci, Monsieur McKenzie. On se tourne.
Thank you, Mr. McKenzie. Now on to Shell. Ms. Pierce, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation to participate today. I want to first acknowledge that as I'm in Toronto, I'm on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I am very grateful to be healthy and in good spirits, and I hope you are too. Today's topic is at the core of Shell's strategy, which supports our purpose to provide more and cleaner energy solutions as we work to become a net zero emissions energy business by 2050. Shell Canada Limited has operated in Canada for over 100 years. We are an integrated energy company offering products and services ranging from aviation fuels to sulfur and EV charging. We operate fuel refining and chemicals facilities near Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Sarnia, Ontario, and have nearly 1,500 branded mobility stations across Canada. Shell Canada also produces shale gas and liquids in Alberta and BC, and is a joint venture participant in LNG Canada. We're also proud of our advancements in carbon capture and storage, or CCS, and low-carbon fuels. There's no question the global energy system is in transition, and so is Shell. The pace of our own transition will be guided by how fast we can adapt our businesses and will depend on external factors, such as progressive government policy and customer choice. We believe our strategy will transform Shell into a net zero emissions energy business, creating value for our shareholders, customers, and wider society. However, our operating plans can't reflect our 2050 target yet, as this is outside our 10-year planning period. However, in the future, as society moves towards net zero emissions, we expect Shell's operating plans to reflect this movement. If society as a whole doesn't get to net zero in the same time frame, however, there's a significant risk that Shell may not meet its target. We recognize the importance of Canada's climate targets and the need for society, including companies like ours, to play a role. Shell Canada has joined the federal government's Net Zero Challenge, which recognizes businesses developing and implementing credible net zero emissions plans. Shell has laid out short and medium-term climate targets in support of our net zero emissions by 2050 target. These targets are complemented by the ambition to help address Scope 3 emissions, which come from customers' use of the oil products we sell. This means we are working to reduce our own emissions and shift our product offering towards low and zero carbon products. Already, we are making good progress. Globally, by the end of 2023, we'd achieved more than 60% of our target to halve Scope 1 and 2 emissions from our operations by 2030, compared with 2016. Shell Canada is well positioned to deliver on our strategy here in Canada. We are decarbonizing our operations, for instance, through reducing methane emissions and incorporating renewable power, such as hydro, solar, and wind power, and CCS. Increasingly, we are also investing to increase the supply of low-carbon fuels and rolling out EV charging across the nation in partnership with governments and communities. We are also contemplating other investments, including a large-scale CCS project in Alberta. Decarbonization projects must be investable. We believe society will not achieve the needed scale of emissions reductions if projects are highly reliant on government funding alone. Instead, companies need to develop business models that are plausible, profitable, and can unleash private capital while working closely with governments. It's worth noting that last year, roughly 8% of Shell's global investment was in Canada. The majority of the spend was on the LNG Canada project, which will use natural gas and renewable electricity to reduce emissions from the plant by more than 1/3 compared with the world's best-performing facility when it starts up. LNG Canada is the largest private sector investment in Canadian history and a once-in-a-generation opportunity for First Nations, local communities, and provincial and national economies. Shell supports a balanced energy transition, one in which the world achieves net zero emissions while still providing a secure and affordable supply of energy today. To help manage affordability for all Canadians, it's vital we don't dismantle the current energy system faster than we can build the clean energy system of the future. By working together with effective government policies, we can help shift consumer demand to low-carbon products and develop the infrastructure and technology needed for the energy transition. Shell's ability to raise and invest capital through the energy transition depends on delivering strong shareholder returns. Governments and taxpayers can't and shouldn't fund the transition alone. If projects don't offer attractive returns, capital won't be invested. In closing, Shell has a clear strategy to become a net zero emissions energy business by 2050 and has set clear targets to measure our progress. By making decarbonization projects investable, we can unleash further clean energy investment, which will ultimately benefit all Canadians. I look forward to the discussions today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Madame Pierce. On se tourne maintenant vers Madame Haradance.
Thank you very much. Now we will move on to Ms. Haradance from Enbridge.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I'm Michelle Haradance, EVP and President of Enbridge's gas distribution and storage business. We acknowledge that our projects and operations span treaty and tribal lands, the national Métis homeland, unceded lands, and the traditional territories of Indigenous nations, tribes, governments, and groups across Turtle Island. As such, we have a responsibility to preserve and care for the land, learn from her original inhabitants, and move forward together in the spirit of healing, reconciliation, and partnership. And in the spirit of reconciliation, I want to thank all parliamentarians for the important step this spring towards a national loan guarantee program. Following on the success of our own Project Rocket, where 23 communities purchased an equity position in our Athabasca system thanks to the Alberta program, we believe the national loan guarantee is a critical step to open up more opportunities for Indigenous communities to fully participate in Canada's economy. Building on my co-panelist presentations, which represent the perspectives of upstream producers, I'll focus today on the critical role of natural gas in delivering safe, reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy to millions of homes and businesses in Canada and beyond. Enbridge recently celebrated our 75th anniversary, and here our Ontario utility has been operating for over 175 years. Over that time, we've evolved to meet society's changing energy needs while contributing to Canada's economic development and quality of life. Today, our gas distribution and storage business serves 4 million customers in Quebec and Ontario, including rural, northern, and Indigenous communities. And with our recent U.S. acquisitions, we'll soon be the largest natural gas utility in North America. We're North America's leading energy infrastructure company for oil and natural gas, moving resources from production to demand centers across the continent and around the world, and we're one of the largest renewable companies on the continent. We also deliver benefits for Canada. In 2023, Enbridge invested over $2.5 billion in capital and spent over $3.6 billion on operations across Canada. We contributed over $3.15 billion in property tax, corporate tax, and other taxes. And we firmly believe natural gas has a key role in our energy future. In fact, the IEA predicts that the path to net zero will involve diverse energy sources that will shift over the decades. Natural gas is a highly reliable energy source and remains a cost-effective energy source for consumers, at about half the cost of oil or propane and about 50% cheaper than electric baseboard heating. Natural gas pairs well with renewable energy. When the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, or in cold snaps and heat waves, natural gas is quick and easily dispatchable to meet peak demand. A 24/7 economy requires 24/7 power, and as energy demand rises, all sources will be needed to meet it. For heavy industries like steel, chemicals, and cement, natural gas is a critical feedstock and a fuel for the manufacturing process. In the future, these sectors may well be supported further by lower carbon options like renewable natural gas, carbon capture and storage, and eventually hydrogen. And while, of course, electricity will have a vital role in the future energy mix, it's inextricably linked to natural gas. For instance, consider the growing power demands for data centers and AI. Clean tech, EV plants, and critical minerals, which have been enticed by federal incentives, also create more energy demand. We believe industry has a key role to play in reducing emissions related to natural gas. Enbridge is a signatory to the One Future Coalition, a group of over 55 gas companies aiming to reduce methane emissions intensity to below 1%. To get there, we're investing in modernizing our systems. We're innovating to manage methane emissions. And in 2023, we reported a 20% reduction in absolute emissions from 2018 levels and a 40% reduction in our methane emissions. We're encouraged by these results and focused on reaching our 2050 net zero target. As we look to ensure Canada's investment in its natural gas infrastructure remains used and useful, we're investing in low carbon fuels that can be blended with natural gas. In Ontario, we're involved in a biogas facility that's turning organic waste into RNG, fueling Ontario's first carbon negative bus in the city of Hamilton. We also launched just north of me here, North America's first hydrogen blending project, which serves over 4,000 residential customers in Markham and which has lots of potential to grow. Finally, Canadian LNG is providing energy security in Europe and Asia and helping reduce global emissions by replacing coal-fired generation. Canada must look beyond our borders and the 1.5% of global emissions we produce to deliver our reliable, affordable, and responsibly produced natural gas to our allies and partners. Now, I thank you, and I certainly welcome your questions.
Merci beaucoup à tous et à toutes.
Thank you to everyone. Before beginning, Ms. Pierce, can you please just raise the boom of your mic a little bit under your nose for the interpreters? Thank you. So on to Ms. Stubbs. She will start the first round with 6 minutes.
Thank you, witnesses. Agree with everything just said about LNG. And of course, LNG Canada was previously approved by the federal Conservative government, then deliberately delayed and risked by the government who froze all the applications, put that project under review again unnecessarily, and then gave it the stamp of approval. Just because of the subject of the motion, I'm going to concentrate on upstream oil sands producers, but invite all of the other CEOs to follow up to any questions I ask or subjects you want to expand on in written commentary, which must be included in a final report from this committee. I just want to ask a very quick question, a yes or no question, to Mr. Kruger, Mr. Corson, and Mr. McKenzie quickly. Recently, a statement was made that after 40 years, your companies have done very little to combat climate change. Now, the three conservative colleagues at this table here, we represent the workers, the Indigenous workers, employers, contractors, and communities in which all of your companies operate. That was certainly shocking to us and not near what we see in our own backyard. Quickly, yes or no, does that statement reflect your position and the position of your company?
Yeah, one has to turn the mic on. I think somebody's witness is on mute. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I said I'll start. That does not represent our position, Suncor's position.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would concur with that. That doesn't represent Cenovus's position either.
Okay.
And nor does that represent Imperial's position.
Okay, thank you. So to the three of you, which country, or sorry, just starting with Mr. Kruger and also just for time, you know that we've got very limited here. What country is the top competitor for energy investment in Canada?
Well, right now you'd like, well, one, capital is it's global, but right now you would say we compete for investment capital with the United States, perhaps more than anywhere else today.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. If you look at the top 10 producing countries, Canada being 4 in most circumstances, sometimes 5, it is the U.S. that we compete largely for capital with.
I would agree as well.
Then will you comment, which country is it easier to get things built in, the United States or Canada? And how does Canada's regulatory and fiscal framework compare to the United States and also to other major energy producing countries around the world? Where certainly I know, Mr. Kruger, you have lots of experience.
Well, Shannon, you asked a direct question. I'll give you a direct answer. From a regulatory policy standpoint, it's much more difficult to get things done in Canada. We've got a level of complexity, a level of layering, a overlapping of policies that make it longer time and more cost to plan and execute energy projects than the United States.
Yeah, and I'd suggest the same. We don't have as much or as many assets in the U.S. as other companies might have. So I can't speak specifically on a state-by-state basis, for example, but I would suggest it's becoming increasingly difficult to get projects through the regulatory process in Canada.
Again, further details and written follow-up on these questions. So to the upstream oil sands developers who have operated for decades, hasn't it always been your understanding that upstream oil sands development is provincial jurisdiction?
I'll go ahead again. I think the resource certainly is owned by the province, and the vast majority of the permits and approvals we need and seek are from the province, unless it gets to some. There are some select issues with water and things that require national approvals.
Yeah, and I would agree with that.
Yeah, nothing to add.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, Mr. Corson. Do you
just one moment? If you're not, could the witnesses when a witness is not speaking, we ask that you put yourself on mute if that's possible. Sure. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Stubbs.
To each of you, do you intend to grow your oil sands production and specifically Canada's oil exports?
Well, I can start. Certainly that is our objective. We have been growing our production, and we see there continues to be a global market for our products, and we think Canada can play a very important role that brings significant economic benefits to this country. So yes, our objective is to economically and responsibly grow production.
Maybe.
Yeah, and
ahead,
Cenovus, Cenovus is the same. We're currently growing our oil sands production by about 70,000 barrels a day over the next 3 to 4 years. What I would say is we're one of the major shippers on the TMX pipeline, which gives us egress and access to global pricing for our products. But without that egress, I'm not sure that would happen. I think one of the two issues that we have in Alberta in growing our oil sands production is solving for carbon, which we need to do, and ultimately solving for egress as well. And both of those fall within the regulatory framework that you referred to in your prior questions.
Merci. C'est maintenant au tour de M. Van Koeveren.
Now on to Mr. Van Couverden.
The witnesses for joining us here, I can tell you that I've never seen the room this full, so there's considerable interest in this discussion. So thank you very much for joining us virtually. I'm going to focus all of my questions on oil sands, and my questions will be directed to you, Mr. Kruger, if that's okay. I'm just trying to find my camera. It's just over there so I can speak directly to you. Just over there. Thank you very much again for joining us. Now, I've got a couple of graphs here, and the first graph is a change in Canada's oil and gas sector greenhouse gas emissions since 2005. And I'm hoping that with the camera you'll be able to see this. The dark blue line represents the increase from oil sands production. You'll notice that it has gone up about 40%, and 40% of all oil and gas emissions are from the oil sands, and they represent about 87 megatons in emissions. For reference, Canada's emissions sit at around 708 megatons, so that's
Mr.
a very considerable.
I'm told the same rules apply in committee as in the House with regards to props.
Okay. Well, there's no other way that I can share this graph, but as everybody can see, this the oil and gas emissions have gone up quite dramatically. Mr. Kruger, are you familiar with this? Are you familiar with the 87 megaton contribution just from the oil sands in Canada to Canada's overall emissions?
I'm not familiar with the graph. It wasn't legible to me, but I am familiar with generally emissions increase as is related to production increase with Canada's growing share of the world's oil markets.
Okay, I'm glad that you referenced the total production going up, because that's very true. What's also gone up is the individual emissions intensity per barrel. I have another graph here. I won't hold it up. It indicates a 9% increase in the emissions intensity per barrel of oil in Canada. Do you agree that the emissions intensity per barrel of crude oil in the oil sands has gone up as a result of longer distances, access to mines and processing facilities?
I can't speak to the oil sands overall, but I'm looking at a comparable chart for our company where I would say it's been essentially flat over the last 5 years from an intensity standpoint.
Okay, well, my graph goes back a lot farther than that, to 2004, and what I see is more than a 10% increase in emissions intensity per barrel of crude from the oil sands. Now, here I have a comparison of the emissions intensity per barrel, kilograms per CO2 per barrel of various types of oil and gas. And like I said, I'm focusing on the oil sands here. The oil sands have an average emissions intensity of about 174 kilograms per CO2, whereas U.S. Bakken with no flare is around 24 kilograms per CO2. Mexico Cantorell is around 40. Even U.S. Alaska North Slope is just over 174 kilograms of CO2 per barrel of oil. And like I said, that's been going up over the last 20 years or so. 174 kilograms of CO2 in emissions per barrel. And that's, again, emissions intensity per barrel in the oil sands. This is just extraction and processing emissions before it's even used. So when people, particularly, I've heard it a couple of times today, but conservative politicians regularly say that Canada needs more oil and gas. You know what? I tend to agree. If we can produce it more ethically and with a lower carbon intensity, then certainly. But have we demonstrated an ability to reduce the carbon emissions per barrel of bitumen extraction in the oil sands? Because everything that I'm reading here indicates that it's upwards of 7 times more oil intensive than oil elsewhere. So where's the rationale for Canada oil sands being way less carbon intensive? It seems like it's the opposite of what's true.
Well, again, I don't have the benefit of the data and charts you're looking at. Had they been shared ahead of time, might have been able to more directly comment then. But I would say generally, and I know 3 companies represented on this call today have invested tens of billions of dollars in new generation mining that has essentially produces a barrel that is an equivalent of a barrel refined in the U.S. today. We've done that at Fort Hills, and I'll let my other colleagues speak, but it's called paraffinic froth treatment. It is a technology that has been developed in Canada that allows Canadian barrels to be competitive on the world scale. I'll add one other quick one. One of my colleagues also mentioned what they're doing with in situ technologies to introduce solvents that dramatically reduce the carbon intensity. I think therein lies the answer that Canadians, when given the opportunity, their technology, their ingenuity, can achieve the climate objectives and benefit Canada and Canadians at the same time.
And sure, Mr. Kruger, I would tend to agree with you that it's possible, but it hasn't been demonstrated yet because, like I said, Canada's oil sands per barrel emissions are 7 times higher than an alternative. So when people say that we should be lowering the emissions of the oil and gas production average around the world by increasing emissions from our oil sands, it just doesn't add up. There's more emissions per barrel from our oil sands production than literally any type of oil or gas around the world. So again, I'll read your quote precisely. It says, "The world will not consume one less barrel of oil simply because Canada chooses not to provide it. That barrel will come from somewhere else, and in most cases, somewhere with less commitment to responsible development and climate action." Mr. Kruger, it's demonstrated right here that Canada Oil Sands bitumen is the highest emissions product on the market today. Is it going to go down? Is it going to get towards, U.S. Bakken? Can we get it under 100 kilograms of CO2 per barrel?
A very brief response, please.
Well, I think the answer is if by working together, we talked about the Pathways Alliance, for example, there are major opportunities to do that. And when we do that, the world benefits, Canadians benefit, and Canadian industries benefit. So yeah, I'm a believer that the answer to that's yes.
Well, Canadians are relying on you. I really hope we can get oil sands emissions down.
Merci. On va passer.
Now on to Ms. Posey. Thank you for being among us today. I do have questions, but first I would like to give a statement because there's a lot of things that need to be said. The subject of this meeting is on the profits of your companies. I'll remind you that your activities cause the highest levels of CO2 emissions in Canada and even in the world, as Mr. Van Koevoeten just highlighted. We of course, interested in the sums of around $39 billion a year, but we're also interested in hearing about your efforts to reduce emissions, which is proving to be a major challenge since you're all in favor of increasing your production, despite Canada's commitments to reduce its emissions with the Paris Agreement. Through your lobbying organization, so the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers or the Pathways Alliance, you've managed to convince the federal government to allocate tens of billions of dollars in tax credits for carbon capture and storage projects. And of course, there are many more, but I won't mention them. This technology will in no way contribute to reduce your emissions. And I will get back to that later. This is the Environment Committee. The recent revelations obtained by journalist Karl Mayer's investigation, published on May 27, very recently in the Narwhal, are nauseating. In addition to coming to beg for public funds while your pockets are still lined through the Pathways Alliance, you have asked for the assurance that your carbon capture and storage projects will not be subjected to federal review under the Impact Assessment Act. This request is shocking to me when there's a climate crisis, and I think it's shameless. In order to make such demand, the Alliance must have an unwavering and unshakable confidence and certainty that the industry has a stronghold over the political system. The Alliance's exchanges with 4 ministers, which are reported in this recent article, date back to January 2023 and make clear demands that read more or less like a carbon copy, making a little pun there to lighten the atmosphere and the mood, but these are carbon copies, or a carbon copy likely of the measures you obtained in the last budgets. The other demands, not yet included in the federal budget, may be included in a future budget, since it has to be said, Pathways Alliance is certainly very keen. In 2020, Shell Canada announced that its Quest project had captured 5 megatons of CO2 in 5 years. Many of the organizations that wrongly maintain that carbon capture and storage technology is the missing link in decarbonizing the oil and gas sector are using this data to indoctrinate the government a little more towards the CCS technologies, despite its failures. Because yes, after verification, research and evaluation have shown that Quest has actually emitted more CO2 than it has captured. I'll get back to that as well, but I'd rather tell you now. Your claim that carbon capture and storage will save us, I don't believe it. And I'll get back to that later. I'll remind you that Capital Power Corp terminated the Genesee project located west of Edmonton last May, which is very recently, and I quote its CEO, Avik Dey. After carefully reviewing the project, we have concluded that the project does not meet the risk and return thresholds we have set for ourselves, and we ended it. Bloomberg estimated, for facilities that are in operation, that the cost of capture corresponded to $600 per ton. Hundreds of experts and credible organizations around the world, and even people from your own industry, and those who don't want to greenwash, keep repeating, if the technology isn't ready after 5 years of development, it's better to move on to something else. But it's been over 15 years that we've been talking about carbon capture and storage, and you have highlighted it in order to rake in the money. The bottom line is that we need to significantly reduce the balance sheet of your sector, period. Data published by the Canadian Petroleum Products Association Producers Association earlier this year confirmed that the sector's investment will reach over $40 billion by 2024, and that these sums will not go towards decarbonizing measures, but rather towards increasing production and exploitation, or extraction rather, with no other ambition than to maximize your profits. You're not even capable of devoting the equivalent of a year's profits to the climate transition, to transforming your workers' skills towards renewable energies. You're lining your shareholders' pockets with taxpayer money. The money of Quebecers and taxpayers should be used to slow down and to plan our exit from our dependence on fossil fuels, which is what various organizations, the International Energy Agency, are calling for. So here is my question. Ecosystems are suffering, human health is afflicted, and so are human rights. The Senate has just completed a 2-year study. Why are you siphoning public funds if you just want to continue with business as usual? And where is your sense of responsibility? And how are we supposed to want to make you partners in this transition? Ms. Posé, the question will have to wait. Your time is up. On to Ms. Collins. Maybe you will ask for the answer to Ms. Posé's question. The floor is yours, Ms. Collins.
Mr. Chair, my first question is for Mr. Kruger. And you have been making record-breaking profits. You know, the oil sector, oil and gas companies, raked in $63 billion in 2022 alone. The CEOs around the virtual table today make millions in salary and bonuses. You personally made $36.8 million in your first year as CEO. I was just doing a quick calculation with the median income of someone in my community. That would take them about 640 years to make. So in that same year, in that same first year, you also laid off 1,500 workers. And we asked Canadians to send us questions that they wanted us to ask the oil and gas CEOs. And the question that came up the most often was, how do you sleep at night? When there are climate fires ravaging our country, when people are displaced from their homes, when hundreds die in heat domes, when people are scared to let their kids go out and play because the smoke is too dangerous to breathe. How do you sleep at night?
I appreciate your desire to create headlines, point fingers, and attempt to villainize the industry and in it. But what I would say, when you do that, you're actually attacking hundreds of thousands of Canadians nationwide that work hard each and every day to provide energy. It's the support of this country. So, I'll take that. I've got thick skin. Some of your data is inaccurate, but I understand the emotion behind it. I want to get to why we were called here today. It was to talk about profits and emissions reduction. And
my question in particular was, how do you sleep at night, given the climate crisis and your responsibility in fueling it?
Point of order,
Yes,
I need decorum around here in terms of personal attacks on individual witnesses.
I think to be honest, that's more of a rhetorical question. But I stopped the clock. But
point of order, Chair.
Pardon?
The question was asked, and I think that in a standard operating practice with committee, an approximate amount of time of a question asked versus the ability for the answer to be given. And Ms. Collins asked a question. Certainly, Mr. Kruger was starting to answer.
Mr.
And
Chair?
I think that it is only appropriate and in line with the traditions of this place to allow for answers to be given.
And Mr. Keurig to allow an answer to be given. What I'm saying is, I'm just making a comment that was a rhetorical question, but
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Collins. Nothing wrong with rhetorical questions.
It was not.
Permitted.
It wasn't a rhetorical question. This was the question that we got most often from Canadians who wrote in wanting answers from oil and gas CEOs. This was their question.
Okay. Well. You go ahead. I'm going to start the clock now. You go ahead, Mr. Kruger, and the floor is yours
and
to answer the question.
Mr. Chair, I believe that Mr. Kruger answered the question. Then he wanted to change the topic to something else. And so if he's not wanting to answer that question in particular, I have more questions.
Okay, we didn't give him a chance to answer the question. So, Mr. Kruger, do you want to answer that question?
Actually get on the topic of the study.
I don't, quite frankly, I don't know what the criteria is for how do I sleep at night.
Yeah.
But what I do know is the tens of thousands of employees and contractors that work for us work hard each and every day to provide safe, secure, reliable energy for Canada. So other than my sleeping patterns, I don't have any other reply to that one.
Thank you. We had climate-impacted Canadians come to Ottawa today and share their stories. They told us about having their homes burnt to the ground. They told us about having floods completely ruin decades of memories. They told us about their community that will soon be swept away. Farmers who have told us about the impact of the smoke on their workers, of the impacts of the climate crisis on our food systems. It is wild to me that when we are facing a climate emergency, we have the people around this virtual table raking in billions of dollars and then coming to the government and asking for more handouts. Why is it that you expect everyday Canadians, taxpayers, to fund the... And I understand that my Conservative colleagues want to protect oil and gas CEOs, that they feel like they need to defend them at every corner. But
excuse me, colleagues, I'm going to stop the clock. Ms. Collins has the floor, and everyone has their time, and it's their time, and so I just would ask members to maybe just let the witness and the questioner speak unimpeded. Ms. Collins, go ahead.
I'm curious how it is you feel comfortable coming to the federal government asking them for more handouts when you are raking in record profits and can pay to clean up your own pollution.
Who's that to?
Mr. Kruger.
Are you directing that?
Yes.
Oh, I'm apparently pretty popular today. Well, if you look back, let me start on the record profits for a minute. Two of my colleagues said this, and I'll be quick so I can perhaps get my answers in. We are a global capital-intensive industry that goes with cyclic prices on a commodity. So in the last 4 years, yes, we've had a record profit year, and yes, we've had a record loss year. On average, over the last 4 years, we've made over the last 4 years, we've made $17 billion. Big numbers, big industry. In those same 4 years, we've paid $17 billion in taxes and royalties. And each and every year, we've paid an additional $8 billion in salaries, wages, and benefits to Canadians who also pay taxes. So yes, we're a big business and the numbers are big, but it goes up and down. And to characterize us as record profits, 1 year, yes. But then also remember the year that was a record loss. That's the last 4 years in the roller coaster of global oil and gas.
And I guess my question is, when you make record profits, when there are headlines that say the oil and gas sector has made more money than it's ever made before, how are Canadians supposed to trust that you will invest that in decarbonization instead of putting it into the pockets of your shareholders and in bonuses to yourselves? Because that's what we've seen. And you have been, part of the oil and gas industry for decades and part of companies who have misled Canadians for years and years. Your companies knew that there was a climate crisis. They knew that climate change was real, and yet funded misinformation to try and convince Canadians that the climate crisis was not as serious as it is. Now,
on doit s'arrêter là parce que
your time is up. We have to finish there because the first round of questions has ended. And we will start the second round of questioning with Mr. Deltel. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your Canadian Parliament. We agree that climate change is real and we have to adapt to the changes. So we must reduce pollution and emissions. Of course, we know that the oil industry plays a major role in the economy of Canada, but also on the environmental impacts. In Quebec, we do consume oil. A recent study said that there was a 7% increase in oil consumption. As long as we will need oil, we will fight for Canadian oil. Why? Because in Canada, we have very high standards in order to respect human rights and environmental standards as well. Canada also benefits from $13 billion in equalization payments. I have some questions. I would like each of you to answer each of my questions. First, what percentage did you manage to reduce the pollution generated to produce 1 barrel of oil? It can be, we can start with Mr. Kruger.
I don't understand the context of the time frame, because I do think that it varies on the time frame, and it varies by the type of production we have.
Okay, so Mr.
So I don't have a simple answer to that question.
Well, because if you produce more, obviously you have more emission. We do understand that. But if by each and every barrel you count your emission, my question is, do you reduce the emission by each barrel over the last year, over the last years?
Yeah. Thank you. And I'll be quick so my colleagues can answer. I would say right now, for example, we're the largest blender of biofuels in consumer products, diesel and gasoline. That is reducing the carbon intensity of individuals that are not only the product we produce, but they're consuming. When we're investing right now $1.7 billion to cut the emissions at an oil sands plant by cogeneration, going from coke-fired boilers to natural gas-fired boilers. That project will be complete by the end of this year, and you'll see the corresponding emissions reductions thereafter. So the activities and the money we're spending now is benefiting and reducing the carbon content of what we produce and the way our consumers use it.
And if I could comment from Imperial's perspective, I'm quite proud of the progress that we've demonstrated in reducing the emissions intensity of each barrel we produce. As I mentioned in my opening comments, from 2013 to 2016, we reduced that intensity by 20% per barrel. Since 2016 to currently, we have reduced an additional approximate 10%. And as I mentioned, we have a goal, an objective to reduce 30% by 2030. And of course, collectively, as the Pathways Alliance, we've all set objectives to work together to achieve net zero by 2050. So I'm quite proud of that progress. We are going to continue to invest, and we're very committed to this objective.
Madam Pierce.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We are not a major oil producer in the country of Canada, but what I can share with you is that we do have Scope 1, 2, and 3 targets, and on a global basis, what I can share with you is that for Scope 1 and 2, we've reduced by close to 60% of our 50% target by 2030 from 2016 timeframe. I'd also comment that with respect to methane emissions, we've reduced that by 70% since 2016 at the end of last year. We also have a very clear commitment to continue to reduce our methane emissions to near zero by 2030. As it relates to Scope 3, as I mentioned earlier, we do have some commitments towards that. We have a commitment to reduce Scope 3, which is the emissions from our customers, by 15 to 20% by 2030. And we've also made a commitment to reduce the emissions from our oil products by 15 to 20%. Thank you.
So when we talk about reducing emission, it's a never-ending story, because if you realize that if you challenge yourself, you will have to reduce year after year after year. So my question is, what is the target today for this year to reduce emission, and how much money would you intend to invest in reduction of pollution?
On a temps d'une réponse, alors à qui vous êtes?
We're almost out of time, so who do you want answering?
Answer who?
Whoever would like to answer.
Clock is running. 3, 2, 1. Okay, we'll go to Ms.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. I listened with great interest as you all made your opening remarks, and I noted a few things. One, that John McKenzie said that the oil and gas industry is good for Canadians. Suncor CEO Richard Kruger said that we should be producing more oil in Canada because we have strong social accountability and climate action measures. And Ms. Pierce, you said that you were happy to be healthy and in good spirits and wish that we all were too. And I wanted to comment on those things because words are all fine and good, but it really depends on the context and who is listening to those words. So when you talk about the oil and gas industry and being good for Canadians, Mr. McKenzie, it really depends on how you define good. When you were speaking of it, it was all economic measurements. And I would suggest you left out a couple economic measurements, such as share prices and executive compensation. But most Canadians believe that what is good for Canadians is actually keeping global temperature increases to less than 1.5 and certainly 2 degrees Celsius. They believe that good health and economic justice is good for Canadians. And they believe that not seeing out-of-control forest fires, floods, and droughts is certainly good. Absolutely. And Indigenous people that I've spoken to also believe that we have a duty to protect our planet for the next 7 generations. So it seems that that is in a little bit of opposition to the economic good that you referenced. Additionally, the social accountability and climate action measures that you mentioned, Mr. Kruger, it's one of the reasons you're here, because it doesn't seem that the oil and gas industry is actually living up to those measures that we have in place in Canada. And with the increase in production of fossil fuels, carbon emissions have continued to increase. And the industry is against a cap on emissions, which actually would provide social accountability and more climate action. Also against methane regulations. And all those things would help to actually ensure that Canadians believe that the social accountability and climate action we want in Canada were being met by the oil and gas industry. And lastly, Susanna, our youth are not in good spirits. I speak to many of them, and they're experiencing climate anxiety and despair, quite frankly. Elderly people are suffering from heat domes, poor air quality. Homeowners have seen their homes washed away, and farmers are struggling to keep their farms out with droughts. So this is a different reality than you're talking about. And I really believe that given that your emissions from the industry have increased, and you have this belief that you'll meet the goals by 2050, but we haven't seen the action. And there seems to be a lot of uncertainty about the industry actually meeting its goals for 2030 that were set, the 22 megatons. So I would like to request that every one of the companies table their specific plans and investments that they're going to be making that have been board approved to get to net zero with the 2030 interim targets and what investments you have made and are going to make to actually reach those goals. Because while words are good, actions are better. Thank you.
Still have.
Then I'd actually like to ask about your specific commitments, every company, specific commitments that you have made on the to get to that 2020 megaton annual reduction by 2030. The investments now. I know the Pathways for Alliance has a large project. If perhaps we could start with you, Mr. Kruger, what has Suncor committed to investing as of right now to get to that target by 2030?
We publish every year an annual sustainability report and a climate report that details at length the actions we're taking, the commitments were made. And unless you want to take the rest of the time, I could read through that report.
No, I just want to know. I just want to know.
That might be a little easier.
No, I just want to know the specific investment targets you're making in CCUS right now.
In CCUS, it is around the preparation and the negotiation to determine an appropriate framework for the Pathways Alliance, carbon capture and storage. We can't do that on our own.
So you're still in discussion. You've not made any commitments to investment right now.
We can't do that on our own. We need a regulatory framework and we need the right fiscal framework to enable the competitiveness of the industry and to do it so that everybody benefits from it. So the commitments are showing up at the table each and every day with the sleeves rolled up, working hard at multiple levels of government to try to get this done.
Merci. Madame Posey.
Thank you. On to Ms. Posey for 2.5 minutes. My question is for Ms. Pierce from Shell. Of course, I mentioned this earlier. I would like to talk about the 5 megatons that were captured, 5 megatons over 5 years and produced over the same period. The $1 billion for this project were $777 million. Now on to the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. The same institute said that 13 CCS projects currently underway, well, 10 of them are underperforming or are total failures. Here's my question, Ms. Pierce. How is the capture of 1 megaton per year for an industry that produces more than 158 tons in 2022, how do you explain this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. As you may recall, the CCS Quest project was back in the 2010s when it began, and it was a pilot project, and it was advancing the technology. And so as a result, it was a project in which we were learning. It was a project which on its own, partly because of the financial framework and the business models that didn't exist, we had to work with government in order to make it feasible. As a result of that project, however, we now have captured 9 million tons, and that is significant because that's 9 million tons that would have otherwise been emitted. So, in fact, I believe the project has worked, and a lot of the information...
I'll stop you right there. You're saying that you have captured some carbon. In September 2022, that same institute I mentioned earlier says that 73% of the carbon that was captured was sold for oil, so it allows fossil fuel companies to produce even more oil. So yes, Quest captured it, but it also allowed the extraction of more oil. How is that helping in the fight against climate change? 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you for the question. The project was really looking at how do we reduce emissions from the manufacture of oil that is still in demand, unfortunately, as a part of the overall economy. 80% of the world today still depends on fossil fuels. And so we can't shut down the existing energy system, but what we can do is use projects like CCS to decarbonize the fuels that we use today. That is what projects like Quest and other CCS projects are about.
Merci. Madame Collins.
Thank you. On to Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I first want to start off by just going back to something Mr. Kruger said around the taxes that your companies pay. And this is from Canadians for Tax Fairness. They note that from 2021 to 2023, the oil and gas industry recorded $132 billion in pre-tax profits, second only to real estate in the non-financial industries. Among the 10 most profitable industries during this period, the oil and gas sector paid the lowest effective tax rate, 8%. This is because the oil and gas industry makes disproportionate use of tax credits and capital cost allowances. The industry received over $20 billion in tax credits from 2010 to 2021. It is unfortunate that our current government continues to give out huge fossil fuel subsidies, to huge tax breaks to an industry that is raking in record profits and paying an incredibly low tax rate. I also want to talk about the lobbying that is happening. There's a clear analysis that the oil and gas emissions cap proposal is already set so low that it is easily achievable if your companies simply follow through on the voluntary climate promises that you have already made. So it's pretty concerning to learn that you have been actively lobbying to undermine it. And you've also been actively lobbying against a excess profit tax on the oil and gas industry, and effectively, because we learned through the Globe and Mail that the finance minister was considering this and then backed down in the face of lobbying from your industry. So I'm curious why you consistently try and lobby against the policies that you say you're potentially in support of because you want to get to net zero. And maybe we'll start with Mr. Kruger, and then we can go to Imperial with Mr. Corson.
Yeah, Mr. Kruger?
Sure. There was a lot for a first date in that question or statement, or I'm not exactly sure what it all was. But I think if you take it piece by piece, you referenced industry taxes and profits. I can't relate to those, but I can look at what my company has paid. And as I said, in the last 4 years, we've made $17 billion and we've paid $17 billion in taxes and royalties.
And the question was about lobbying and the emissions cap.
Unfortunately, there's no time for the answer. Ms. Goodridge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's interesting as I sit here and reflect. My dad worked 42 years in the oil industry in Fort McMurray, and he very proudly put on steel toe boots every single day as a tradesperson to go and secure Canada's energy future. And he was very proud of that in his time at Syncrude. And he would be, I'm sure, beside himself if he could be here today to watch this. And me at this table questioning the executives. My questions are, to start, to Mr. Kruger. What is the difference in emissions per barrel at the Suncor Base Plant, which is the oldest operation in the oil sands, versus Fort Hills, the newest?
The materially lower at Fort Hills. I don't have the exact numbers for the two different facilities, but the technology applied to develop Fort Hills is the average barrel that produces Fort Hills is essentially the same as the average barrel in North America. So it's materially lower. New technology, much more.
Thank you. I have very little time. Could you table that with the committee, please? My next question, Mr. Corson. There's an active pilot project that's happening at the Cold Lake operation, which is in the southern part of my riding, and it's employing the enhanced bitumen recovery technology. What emission reduction does this project represent?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We have multiple pilots we're pursuing. The enhanced bitumen recovery technology has the potential to reduce emissions intensity by approximately 60%. And as I mentioned earlier, we've recently started up a new operation at Cold Lake called Grand Rapids that we expect to deliver a 40% reduction. So technology plays a very key role in our path to net zero by 2050.
Question to go all over the place. I'm sorry, but we've got very little time. Mr. McKenzie, recently your company announced a very large amount of money, $50 million, to go and help nearby Indigenous communities tackle their very serious housing crisis. Was this part of a regulatory requirement or any kind of government requirement?
So the short answer to your question is that this was done on our own volition. Now, I would like to take credit for that. And that was actually my predecessor, Alex Borbet, who started that program. And we are delivering an immediate need to Aboriginal communities where we do business by building 200 homes over the next 5 years for that $50 million that you spoke of. We're very proud of that.
Well, and to go one further, it's beyond just building homes. You're actually also, and this is something that I'm very proud of, helping Indigenous students get the skills they need at Portage College, which is also in the southern part of my riding, located primarily in Lac-La-Biche. And this goes to show a piece of the fact that doesn't get talked about here. And I know most of the members actually around this table have gone on diatribes explaining to you guys and as a way of undressing you in some form, rather than actually ask questions. I'm very happy that we had the opportunity to have this, because these are important questions that Canadians deserve to have the answers to. So my question, I'll start to Mr. Kruger. What is your annual spend with Indigenous business each year?
Yeah, last year we spent as a total company on the order of $15-16 billion. 23% of that went to indigenous companies, more than $3 billion.
Is that part of a government or regulatory requirement?
No, we do that because we think it's good business.
To Mr. Corson, the same question.
Yes, we take a lot of pride in our relationship with the Indigenous partners we have across our businesses. We've been growing that part of those relationships since 2008. We have spent a cumulative $4.6 billion with our Indigenous partners.
And same question to Mr. McKenzie.
So we too believe in investing in the communities where we do business. And I believe since 2019, we've spent about $1.4 billion with Aboriginal businesses, and since 2009, about $4.5 billion.
Okay, and now my very last question to Mrs. Hernandez. Sorry. The equity partnership with 23 Indigenous communities is groundbreaking in my community, in my region. You talked briefly about the AIOC being a success story. My good friend Justin Burke was the leader on the Athabasca Corporation that led this. Why did you do this?
Malheureusement, on n'a pas le temps d'une réponse.
Unfortunately, we don't have time for the answer, so we will move on to Mr. Longfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and sincere thank you to the executives for coming into what's a difficult meeting, a difficult discussion that we're having. I've come to Ottawa from Guelph, where my youth have really charged me with not pointing fingers at other politicians, at not pointing fingers to be confrontative, but to try and work on the problem of reducing emissions. I really appreciated your framing on your discussion, Mr. Kruger. The profits and planet are not mutually independent, they're mutually dependent. But it seems from today's discussion, we're using two different measuring sticks. We're talking about emissions per barrel versus net emissions. And we need to reduce emissions as a country. And if we're not getting those net reductions from oil and gas because we're increasing production, we have to find those savings somewhere else. And we don't have any savings with the scale of oil and gas. So I think the technical challenge is, how do we decouple emissions from production? How do we reduce emissions faster than we're increasing production? Is that a fair read on the situation, Mr. Kruger?
I think you framed it very well. Is that, in my view, the world's going to consume a given amount of oil independent of what Canada chooses to do.
But the world aside, Canada has reduction targets. And maybe I've lost my witness. We're back. We have reduction targets. And one of the ways of hitting those targets is to put a cap on emissions. As a government, as a party, the Liberal Party made a commitment to cap emissions. We've been having trouble getting that across the line because production keeps going up. And so we're having trouble getting that cap put in place. Could you maybe talk about the challenge from your side that we're trying to work on together?
Yeah, my view is the emissions cap is not, it's unnecessary regulation. I do support a price on carbon and across the economy because I believe that will drive the innovation, the economic incentives on all of our part to continue to improve our business. I fundamentally worry that a cap on emissions, the way it's constructed, will be a cap on production. And I believe in my heart with the technology and innovation of Canadians, we should be a big part of that energy equation for the long term. And I think we can do it in a way Canadians can be proud of.
I think going forward, we have to look at a way of getting that cap in place where you could still have production, but at a lower net output of carbon emissions. But that's a challenge we can't solve in the 2 minutes I have left. But just to put that on the table in terms of our discussion, and it is helpful for you to say that having an economic driver such as price on carbon on a long term gives us capital incentives for countries to know what the investment will look like in Canada in the years ahead. Pathway Alliance also supported that. And maybe you could just briefly comment on that as well.
Maybe my colleagues on the John or Brad on the Pathways Alliance side of it, I could comment, but you guys have been very close to it for years.
In 20 seconds or less, if you could, maybe John. We haven't heard too much from you.
Sure, I'll take a crack at it. And I think we as a company and Pathways have been clear that a carbon tax can work to reduce emissions, but it has to be universally and ubiquitously applied. And it can't target one particular industry or one particular segment of the economy. I think the other piece that's important is there has to be an alternative.
Yeah, thank you. And I think as we did on a very short period for 2 years to get different way of getting home heating oil off the market and try and help with rural communities, it was a short period to get an incentive in place, to get an alternative in place. But maybe over to Ms. Pierce. The committee right now is talking about the effectiveness of the Net Zero Accelerator Fund. And we've been having some debates on that, and we will be having a further discussion on whether that's an effective way of helping businesses reduce emissions. Could you maybe comment on that briefly? And I have a follow-up question on that, Ms. Pierce.
Okay, thank you. We're not directly involved in the Net Zero Accelerator Fund, but what I can say is that when we're looking at making decarbonization investments, they need to be investable. And so that means compared to other investments we might make, they need to be investable. If there are ways of actually using funds like that to make that happen, it can accelerate decarbonization.
Thank you. And I see the chair making motions. Thank you all for your answers and for your participation.
Merci. On passe au troisième tour.
Thank you. On to the third round. We will start with Mr. Crick. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair, and I appreciate the fact that we can have this conversation today. I did want to give Mrs. Hernandez an opportunity to answer, if you could, just very briefly in 30 seconds or so, about the multi-generational benefit that your company's investments will have on local First Nations in Alberta's north.
I think you might be referring to me, Mrs. Herodens. Yes, absolutely. And that you're referring to our Project Rocket. And that, I have to tell you, the question that was asked was, why did we do that? We did that because it was the right thing to do. We did that because it was a fundamental part of our Indigenous reconciliation plan. And I can tell you that I was there in Calgary on the 30th of September 2022 when we announced that project, and I have never seen a more excited and proud group of employees that we had. But most importantly is, and we met recently, our Indigenous Advisory Committee was in to meet with our board a few weeks ago, and Justin Bork was there. He's part of that, and spoke exactly to what you just said, the multi-generational impact this has. There was one of the chiefs who referred to having in the past a few $1,000s per member that he could spend, and that number changing to investing in his community to the tune of $100,000 per member that he could invest in his community. Just dramatic impact.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that, and I'd like to ask Mr. Corson and Mr. Kruger the benefit of energy investment. I think is misunderstood by certainly the left-leaning political parties around this table, but in the communities that I represent, we have a small and medium-sized employers that work diligently, provide services to many of oil and gas companies. So I'm just wondering if you could briefly comment, Mr. Corson and Mr. Kruger, about how much your companies are investing in contractors that are essentially small and medium-sized enterprises that exist in the communities like which I represent. We'll start with Mr. Corson, like 20 seconds or so, and then Mr. Kruger.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I don't have any specific numbers on that, but it is critical for our company and our industry to deliver reliable energy supply to the communities that we depend on local contractors. We have our own large workforce, but we also employ significant numbers of contractors at probably more than double our workforce. And that is one of the key economic benefits.
And I hate to cut you off, but it's a short amount of time, so Mr. Kruger.
Yeah, let me be quick. We have 16,000 employees. On any given day, we have 28,000 contractors that work at our operations. The vast majority of them are local to where the operation is. So it's approaching a 2-for-1 ratio. So the contractor support and the money we spend in that is equal to or more, typically more than what we pay our own employees.
Wow. That's a lot of jobs that the Liberals, the NDP, and the Bloc Québécois want to shut down in the communities that I represent. We heard earlier some of the conversation around the regulatory regimes that exist. So I'd like to ask again, Mr. Corson and Mr. Kruger, is Canada leading the world in terms of the accountability for environmental activities related to the energy sector? As 5 seconds or so, just yes or no, ideally, Mr. Corson, and then Mr. Kruger.
I've worked all over the world, and Canada has some of the most stringent regulatory requirements of any place in the world, which is why when it comes to something like an emissions cap, I think it's unnecessary. There's plenty of other vehicles and requirements in place that create the necessary drives.
Does that predate the Liberals as well, just to be clear? Those strict regulations?
You know, I've only been a part of Imperial for a little bit of around 5 years, so I can't comment specifically on that.
So, Mr. Kruger, very, very quickly, if you could answer the same thing, these strong regulatory environments, and if that's something that Canada's known for, that including legacies that predate the current government.
We have high hurdles in Canada in terms of regulatory requirements, which is fine. One of the challenges we have is we're laying on regulatory requirement after requirement that brings about complexity and a burden. It's like playing hockey, but the net's moving.
Right.
The net keeps moving.
So if I could just wrap up in my last 15 seconds or so, I just want to say this. While the Liberals seem to want us to freeze in the dark and be poor, I think it's time to support an industry that actually can build our economy and provide the world the energy that we need, including at a lower emissions rate than our global counterparts. And it boggles my mind how Liberal and NDP and Bloc Québécois members of Parliament can sleep at night when they want to put my constituents out of work.
Madame Châtel.
Merci.
Thank you, on to Ms. Châtel. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Thanks to the Pathways Alliance, many of you have committed to reducing emissions to the tune of 20 million tons by 2030. You had the objective of being carbon neutral by 25 years from now. I'd like to highlight, however, that there are very few capital investments that are being made, and those are necessary to reach those goals, despite the fact that governments have invested billions of dollars on, and they've put that money on the table. I know that foreign oil companies such as BP are investing massively, between $7 and $9 million in clean energies. My question is for Mr. Corson. The president of the Pathways Alliance said that one of the main obstacles to more capital investment for decarbonization had to do with Mr. Poilievre's position on carbon taxing. There was no clarity, and you mentioned that carbon pricing is efficient if it's applied to all sectors. Do you agree with the Pathways Alliance leader's position?
Well, let me first comment by saying that what we're undertaking with Pathways is an unprecedented level of investment, an unprecedented level of emissions reduction for a sector. In order to make those investments, we need clear policy that will be sustainable over many decades, because that's the nature of the investments we're making. I can't comment specifically on the references that you mentioned to a Pathways executive, but having the clarity and the sustainability is key to us making these long-term investments.
Merci beaucoup. Donc,
So, in summary, the fact that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have no position on this and want to get rid of the carbon tax will prevent the oil industry from decarbonizing. So, Mr. Kruger, Carson, McKenzie, are you ready to make the necessary investments and reduce the profitability short term in order to strengthen the viability and competitiveness long term of your companies as the world is decarbonizing? And this would be for your companies, for investors and stakeholders, and for Canadians who work for your company. And do you commit to doing it like other companies around the world are doing it?
À qui la question?
Who's the question for? Mr. Kruger, then Mr. Corson, and Mr. McKenzie.
Merci.
Sure. I think we're doing that. I think we're spending material money, and I referenced whether it's cogen investments, fuels blending, biofuels, energy efficiency. I think we're doing that in a way that's economic and keeps our business strong and can attract capital while at the same time reducing the carbon content of what we produce and how we produce it. But you have to have both. It has to be, if we can't attract capital, we can't invest capital. And I think some of my colleagues commented on that. But I think, I think we are doing that.
Merci, Mr. Carson.
Thank you, Mrs. Corson and McKenzie.
Yes, thank you. Well, I would echo that we as a company are definitely progressing many investments. I commented on some of those in my opening remarks, both those that impact Scope 1 and 2 emissions, and also those that impact Scope 3 with our renewable diesel. We need to continue to work this significant challenge together as a joint partnership between industry and federal government and provincial government. And that's the only way we're going to overcome the significant obstacles associated with this project.
Mr. McKenzie.
So I would agree with my colleagues. I think the investment is continuing to decarbonize. And the Pathways members are all doing their individual investments as we wait for a financial framework that works for everybody with Pathways, as well as some regulatory certainty. I know at Cenovus, we've made a commitment to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 35% by 2035. This year, we've already reduced them by 10% vis-a-vis the baseline in 2019. But I think Brad made a point that is really important.
Excuse Mr. McKenzie.
Sorry to cut you off, Mr. McKenzie, but we are out of time. Ms. Puzy. Thank you. Earlier, I'm not sure which one of you said that they were waiting for the implementation of some regulation, but you don't want it anyway. You are against it. Mr. Kruger, I'd like to ask you some questions. In your opening remarks, you talked about exporting oil, but that is something that I would criticize you and the entire industry for. We never take into consideration the oil that is burned, and that is what generates CO2. But I would like to come back to the request from the Pathways Alliance. They talk about wanting to reduce emissions through the net zero strategy, but the emissions have not continued to increase. So Canada hopes to reduce 40% of emissions in all sectors from the industry, from your industry, from the oil and gas industry. They're asking for 30% reduction, which is 10% less than every other industry. And your goal as an industry is 60 to 20%. That's for 2030. So that is a lot lower than what is being asked of other industries. How can you commit to reducing emissions when you are not making any investments and you want to do everything that you can to impede these reductions?
Well, fundamentally, I don't agree with most of what you just said, but rather than going through point by point, I think the challenge is framed wrong. Climate change does not go around a border. It's the climate, it's the globe. And if Canada can export cleaner burning natural gas, if it can export lower carbon oil to offset demand that will be consumed elsewhere, that makes the world a better place. So I think we're so constrained about focusing on restricting Canada.
Mr. Kruger, I have to cut you off. We do agree on one thing. when the oil is exported or burned, that will also cause emissions, and you never take that into consideration in your remarks. So those emissions are just increasing, and that is my criticism. Floods, weather events, agricultural losses, all of that is part of it. So on to Ms. Collins.
And how much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Maybe I'll ask Mr. Corson and Mr. McKenzie the same question that I asked Mr. Kruger. There's a clear analysis that the oil and gas emissions cap is already set at a level that is so low that your companies could, simply follow through on your voluntary climate commitments. So it's deeply concerning to me that I've heard you actively lobbying against an emissions cap. So either your intention is to delay climate action further so you can maximize your profits, or you never had any intention of fulfilling those climate commitments you made.
Well, maybe I'll start. And as I mentioned before, Cenovus has made a commitment to reduce our emissions by 35%. By 2035, and we're well on our road to achieving those targets. I think the comments around the emissions cap are a bit different. I think what's been said is we don't need an emissions cap, and that all the incentives that are present today are the incentives to reduce our emissions, and we've made those kind of commitments.
If it's redundant, why would you lobby against it? You have been promising to reduce your emissions, but your emissions have been going up year after year after year. Why would Canadians trust you?
So I think if you look at the energy industry as a whole, our emissions actually peaked in 2017. And although production has continued to increase, our intensity has actually gone down. And as an individual company, I can tell you the same thing has happened with us. We are down 2 megatons.
Emissions in the oil and gas sector have continued to rise year after year.
Emissions in the oil and gas industry peaked in 2017.
So, maybe I'll ask Mr. Corson, given that we've had reports that the oil and gas sector, your emissions are going up while other sectors are going down, that your voluntary climate commitments should already have you on track for meeting the low level that's required in an emissions cap. Why are you lobbying against it?
Yeah, as I think we've said a couple of times, we don't feel like an emissions cap is necessary. We already have significant regulatory incentives and drives in place that are causing us to proactively reduce our emissions. And I've cited many examples on how we've done that.
Thank you. We have to go now to Ms. Stubbs for 5 minutes.
You just said we again.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for intervention earlier. Appreciate your rebuke of me. I do just want to clarify, of course.
We call rebuking you.
Okay, yes, and you are the most polite and diplomatic ever. I just do want to clarify that, of course, what I said to our colleague MP Collins is that every single question she's asking these industry representatives, she should actually be asking her partners in the Liberal government, because they are the ones who are in negotiations with the big multinationals on every
Mr. Chair, point of order.
About. Second of all,
what's the point of order?
Well, Mrs. Stubbs is referring to my questions about the oil and gas CEOs. I was asking about their lobbying of this government. I think those questions are completely appropriate.
I don't think it's a point of order, so we'll resume.
Yes, what I was clarifying was when you asserted that Conservatives were there to help CEOs. My point is that it's actually your coalition partners who are in negotiations with the multinationals. You should ask them. And second of all, of course, the problem is here, I think we can all see, this is not a good faith, evidence-based, objective attempt to get facts. You can see the absolute disconnect on reality. You can see the absolute lack of knowledge on the different kind of resources, on the details, the technical details, and the really important distinctions between all the kinds of energy resources that Canada is blessed with in order to provide our own energy self-sufficiency and help lower emissions globally. You can now see the spectacle where apparently we all sit here and pretend that emissions don't have borders, or that there are borders that stop emissions. You can now see that there are proponents who are constantly talking about life cycle analysis and cumulative effects, all of which we would agree, but they don't apply those standards to any other sector or any other product. Their policies, their objectives are absolutely to shut your companies down, to shut down your operations. The Prime Minister said it, and they've shown in every single way over 9.5 years on policy, on legislation, and on messages that that is their intention, and that is their deliberate intention. My quick question on the emissions cap: how many countries in the world have an oil and gas emissions cap? Quickly, to the three upstream oil sands CEOs.
None that I'm aware of.
Correct. That's it. I don't need to go to the answer is 0. The reason is, of course, because of this issue around competitiveness, because there's no developed country in their right mind, depending on energy development and resources, who would implement that policy on themselves. I thank our Liberal colleagues for making it clear that the emissions cap is an intended production cap, which is provincial jurisdiction and is designed to kill jobs, businesses, and all of the work of Indigenous communities and Métis settlements, almost 30 that between my colleague and I, we represent in the communities where these operations are, who are among the for decades, the highest capacity, the wealthiest First Nations and Métis settlements in the entire country, who have been funding their own source revenue for their own communities out of their energy operations, and are absolutely going to be crushed, including all of the workers and all of the people that we represent, by the collusion between anti-energy activists, politicians, public policymakers, and frankly, if it is the case, any kind of rent-seeking oligopoly collusion between big government and big corporations. I would say this: there cannot be a shadow of a doubt if you actually listen to the words of our leader, Pierre Poilievre. He said corporatist Canada will not have a free ride with Conservatives. He said, he has said, if there continues to be footsie with anti-resource, anti-private sector, anti-energy activists, politicians, and public policy, we will always get that kind of result. And it's very clear after 9.5 years. This is how stark the issue is. Here's the truth. In 2014, there was over $5 billion more investment in Canada from the U.S. than from Canada to the U.S. Here's the reality after 9.5 years, in 2022, there was over $460 billion more investment in the U.S. from Canada than in Canada from the U.S. It is very clear that this anti-energy, anti-resource, anti-private sector, anti-capitalist, top-down central planning, economic command and control agenda, that is what this is all about. The consequences are catastrophic for the public interest of Canadians. We are here to fight for them, to represent them, not to be accountable to CEOs or to big companies. That's what Conservatives are fighting for, because we represent the people and the communities and the First Nations and the Métis people, and the 90% of oil and gas companies in Canada that have fewer than 100 employees, because they're all small businesses. And you know what they all depend on? They all depend on the project and the businesses from your companies, and that's the truth about how all of this
Okay, we'll have to go to
works.
Mr. Weiler now.
Please make sure that you submit written follow-ups on every question you've been asked, and to correct any facts you need to.
Mr. Weiler, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and you'll have to excuse me. I am having a hard time taking the member opposite seriously when I know her husband is lobbying for Enbridge in this matter. But to the witnesses that are here today, in the last 2 years, the top 4 oil sands companies made $59 billion in profits. As was mentioned by Mr. Kruger, record profits were made. Yet the Pembina Institute notes that there were no new investments in emissions reductions. And 75% of your cash flow was redistributed to share buybacks and dividends. But in 2022, only 0.4% actually went into emissions reductions. So at present, Canada is offering a 50% investment tax credit for carbon capture projects, and Alberta's now proposed 12% on top of that. And so these investments they're eligible back to 2022 in Canada's case. So I just would need a number, perhaps from Mr. McKenzie. what percentage of this project are you expecting the public to cover?
Yeah, we've been really clear as an industry that we're willing to invest in carbon capture and sequestration. We see, where I think I've said in my opening remarks, that we're about 25% of the existing GHG emissions in Canada.
Thank you, Mr. McKenzie. I just need a number.
Yeah, and the numbers that we were talking about, I don't think are out of line with the numbers that you talked about. I think the piece that you're missing is the operating costs that go with it. So it's not only the capital investment up front, but it's also the operating costs that go with carbon capture and sequestration.
Thank you, Mr. McKenzie. So the overwhelming majority of your companies are foreign-owned. Mr. Corson, in your company, Imperial's Matter, only 21% of your company is Canadian-owned. So why do you think it's fair that Canadians should foot this percentage of the project, 50%, when we're running estimated $50 billion deficit last year, when your companies are making record profits in order to clean up emissions coming from your projects, when 79% of the benefit from it could be going out of the country?
Well, the benefit of decarbonization helps everybody, and that's what we're focused on. This project is unprecedented. It will allow us to significantly decarbonize our operations in the near term, long term, achieve net zero by 2050, and at the same time, continue to produce oil that Canadians need and desire because it is beneficial to their standard of living. It brings jobs, and it brings significant royalty and tax revenues that are important to balance the budget of Canadians. So when the oil industry is successful, is profitable, then everybody wins.
Thank you, Mr. Corson. In the last year and a half, the 5 companies that are represented here today have lobbied the Government of Canada on average each calendar day. And while I really appreciate everybody appearing virtually, you're not here today to speak about that, in spite of having this amount of lobbying meetings. What we do have in the crowd, we do have people that today share their stories of how their lives were turned upside down by climate-fueled disasters, whether that's wildfires burning down homes, whether that's floods completely making homes inhabitable, to homes literally being incinerated in 10 to 15 minutes. So, Mr. Kruger, my question to you is, what would you like to say to those folks that are here today that have been deeply impacted by fossil fuels, the burning of fossil fuels that your company and companies represented here are disproportionately responsible for?
Well, I think you're making the point I made earlier that Canadians nationwide expect business leaders and political leaders to work together to benefit Canada with this tremendous endowment of resource we have, and to do it in the right way that benefits Canadians and the globe. That was, quite frankly, that was what I had to say in my opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Kruger. And I think I'll just end on this. It's abundantly clear. What I hear from my constituents all the time is that they're tired of being lied to from the fossil fuel sector. They're tired of seeing the greenwashing that's out there. And frankly, that's why we put forward changes to the Competition Act that's going to require you to provide evidence when you make these kinds of environmental statements. And what we've heard today makes it so abundantly clear why we need an emissions cap.
Time's up. I've had a request from Mr. Morris to ask a question, but I would need to ask some questions, but I would need UC. Do I have UC to allow Mr. Morris some
Can
time?
I answer your question,
Mr. Chair?
Pardon?
Just this clarification, as long as it doesn't take away from the main committee, add 2.5 minutes on to the length of the total committee, so he will be last after the Liberals.
Well, we only have like 12 minutes left. We've finished 3 rounds.
So it'll be 15.
Pardon?
So it'll be 15, and then after we'll do the. We'll just add them on to.
Mr. Chair, I think you have unanimous consent to add 2 minutes to our committee meeting.
Okay. Well,
As long as you add total time.
I've been told I have some hard cap. Okay, so do we mind if Mr. Morris asks unanimous consent? Okay, but the last round will not be a 5-minute round. Otherwise, it'll go way over. So, yes, we have 5-minute rounds. So I think what I'll do for the last round is I'll just cut it.
That's what I was getting at. We don't want to short this committee and the members around here. So we would like to add total time. So Mr. Morris gets his 2.5 minutes, but we would just add that on to so everybody gets.
Okay, so you want a 5-minute round? Okay, so our witnesses will ask our witnesses to stay a few extra minutes. I'm sure it won't be a problem. I'm going to give Mr. Morris, though, I can give him 5 minutes, eh?
Yeah, as long as it's at the end.
The committee has to decide?
It was 2.5 is what he originally asked for.
Is that what you asked for, Mr. Morris?
I will give it
Can I make
what kind of negotiation is this?
Decision and give him 5?
Gets last.
In the democratic spirit, can we give Mr. Morris 5 minutes and everybody else will get 5 minutes? Mr. Morris, take 5 minutes, please. And then everybody else will get 5 minutes and 2.5, whatever. We'll just.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, Chair, I want to start by recognizing that last year it was 185,000 square kilometers of wildfires across the country. That, along with flooding and all the rest of what we're experiencing of the climate crisis right now, that is reflective of a 1.1 degree rise in global average temperatures. We're on track for a 3.2 degree rise by the year 2100. And so what I've heard from the executives who've joined us this morning is that there's no need for an emissions cap. There's no need for a windfall tax on their excess profits. There's no need for any regulation. They've got it all covered. When, as we heard from Mr. Van Cruveren, their emissions are rising considerably on an absolute basis as well as a per barrel basis. Mr. Kruger, my question is for you. You personally made over almost $37 million last year. Your company made $9 billion in profit in 2022. You've said, these are quotes, I very much believe in making money. We are in the business to make money and as much of it as possible. You've also said you're concerned that, quote, we have a bit of a disproportionate emphasis on the longer term energy transition. My question for you is not a rhetorical one. If you could leave a message, like a time capsule recording for Canadians living in the year 2100 who are living in the midst of climate catastrophe, what would you say to them?
Well, first of all, I joined this company at a time when employees and contractors were getting hurt and that the company was grossly underperforming. And so my mission was to come and ensure people are safe each and every day and that we could perform up to the standards of our shareholders and, quite frankly, the province and the federal government. So the premise behind a company being profitable so that it can afford to invest, including in decarbonization, I stand by my words. I believe everything I've said before. It's not one or the other, it's both. If you have an unprofitable sector, we can't invest in decarbonization or in decarbonization. And what the climate will do is we'll get the climate from whatever happens in the rest of the world. I think Canada can and should be a part of that solution. I'm betting on Canadians and Canadian companies to do that. So my message in 2100 would be bet on Canadians, bet on Canada, and put us to work to be part of the solution.
Sorry, to be clear, the question was what you'd say to them in 2100 as we're in the midst of the climate catastrophe that your emissions are leading us towards. I'll also note we had 6 workers from Suncor die since 2020 when it comes to the safety of the workplace. Maybe I'll offer the question to Mr. Corson. Mr. Corson, of course, significant concerns about the practices of your company with respect to the Athabasca River, but I'll offer the same. If you were to make a comment to Canadians in 2100, what would you say to them in the midst of climate catastrophe?
Well, I would hope that those citizens would be reflecting back on the prior 100 years, and they would be proud of the actions that industry took in collaboration with the federal government and the provincial government to both decarbonize, but at the same time, grow the economy and the standard.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Corson. Let me ask you the question directly in terms of the pride that Canadians will feel in the year 2100. Yes or no, do you support an excess profit tax on the profits of your company? Of the profits above $1 billion, say a 15% tax on the profits above $1 billion. Do you support that?
No.
Great. Do you support an emissions cap?
No.
Do you support any additional regulatory measures from the Government of Canada at a time when your industry's emissions are going up? Yes or no?
We have sufficient regulatory framework in place to continue to drive emissions.
Well, I think that's the time capsule
down.
right there. Let's put that in and let's leave that for Canadians in 2100. I think what this demonstrates is it's going to be up to parliamentarians around this table to come together to find some kind of solutions, because I think we're hearing very clearly that the solutions are not going to come from the CEOs who've appeared at witnesses this afternoon.
I think you just need to judge us by our actions, and you'll see continued reductions in our emissions. That's what we're working towards every day.
I'm judging you by the actions with respect to the Athabasca River. I think the police should be judging those actions.
We've had no impact on the Athabasca River, just to be very clear.
Et Monsieur Morris, il vous reste 5 secondes.
Thank you, Chair.
OK, dernier tour, Monsieur Cram, 5 minutes.
All right, on to Mr. Cram for the last round for 5 minutes.
Witnesses for being here today. I'll just ask my question to all the witnesses, and whoever wants to jump in and answer, feel free to do so. So part of the reason why we are here today is to discuss the profitability of the oil and gas sector. I wonder if the witnesses could explain to the committee what has been happening to global demand for oil and gas over the last few years since the end of the pandemic, and how global demand relates to the profitability of Canadian oil and gas companies.
Well, maybe I'll take first crack at it, but demand for all hydrocarbons has been growing, and depending on who you believe, demand for oil this year will grow somewhere between 1.2 and 2.2 million barrels, and demand for natural gas typically grows at about 7 to 8 BCF per year. That doesn't necessarily translate into profitability for Canadian oil and gas, because the other requirement we have is egress to those markets. And so without egress, our product typically gets landlocked and discounted. I think with the startup of the TMX pipeline, what we've seen is us getting much, much closer to global pricing for our oil. And I'm hopeful that with the startup of LNG Canada, we'll start to see improved gas pricing for producers there as well.
Over the last few years, China has continued to build hundreds of new coal-burning plants. Could Canadian oil and gas companies contribute to a reduction in global emissions by increasing Canadian oil and gas exports to China and to other countries?
I believe so.
Okay, Mr. Kruger, could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit? And can you speak to the emissions that come from a typical Chinese coal-burning plant compared to the Canadian oil and gas sector?
Well, I think you look at the energy sources and you look at the seriatim of carbon intensity. Coal would be at the higher end of that. Here in Canada, coke-fired boilers would be at the higher end of that. And as we go to fuel switching, natural gas in our case, or provide clean burning natural gas to China that displaces the need to build coal-fired plants, you are reducing the intensity of the global energy grid. And this is a global challenge, not a local or country-by-country challenge.
Recently, I met with management and the union of Evraz North America, which operates a steel mill just north of Regina, and they've experienced quite a lot of layoffs recently, and they would love the opportunity to build more pipelines for this country. Why doesn't the private sector build more pipelines in this country? And anyone who wants to jump in.
Well, I think at the end of the day, it's Michelle Harridens from Enbridge, and I think at the end of the day, we've talked quite a bit about the regulatory challenges and hurdles that come from investing in the country, and in particular, linear infrastructure such as ours faces many, many years and many, many levels of regulatory hurdles in order to be able to get in the ground and start delivering and provide that egress that Mr. McKenzie spoke to. That's the fundamental reason why.
And finally, I wonder if the witnesses could share with the committee what they feel would happen to global emissions if the oil and gas sector and the oil sands in Alberta were shut down tomorrow. Why don't we go with Mr. Kruger? How about?
Yeah, I don't think global emissions would improve by if Canadian oil and gas were shut down tomorrow. I don't think global emissions would improve. The oil and gas would just come from other jurisdictions, and jurisdictions that would have a variety of carbon content and certainly have a much lower standard of ESG in general. And I know that, or I believe that, I should say, because I've worked in many of those countries.
And I wonder if some of the other witnesses could say whether or not they agree with that last answer.
We've got 10 seconds, basically.
I agree completely.
Yeah, I would agree as well. Global demand for all forms of hydrocarbon continues to grow. And we've said for a long time, those barrels should best come from Canada, where we produce the most responsible barrel globally.
Enbridge completely agrees as well.
I would agree as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to follow up on that if I could. Now, I'm looking at a graph here that I used earlier. Canadian oil sands have an emissions intensity of, on average, about 174 kilograms of CO2 per barrel. Mexico, Cantrell, for example, 40 kilograms per CO2 per emissions. So if we were to take the exact same number of barrels away from the oil sands, if we were to shift all of that production of crude oil to Mexico and reduce the average emissions intensity of per barrel by that amount, like how can every witness on the committee today agree that emissions would go up if the most emissions intensive barrels of oil, and I'm just talking about oil sands here, were replaced by lower emitting barrels? Could somebody please explain that to me?
Yeah, I'll comment. So I guess your premise, your suggestion is shutting down the oil sands makes the world a better place. I don't subscribe to that theory because I think of what we're doing on.
For clarity, Mr. Kruger, I'm sorry I have limited time. I was not suggesting shutting down the oil sands, but if we could improve the emissions intensity. Yeah, if we can improve
I thought that was the basis of your question. I thought you started it by if you shut down the oil sands, doesn't it come from somewhere else? So, okay. I'm sorry, my misunderstanding. I'll let you clarify.
Yeah, what I said was if we were to move production from one place to another, and just oil sands, okay, we're just talking about the oil sands, not Canadian energy production, because you said we should bet on Canadians, and I 100% agree. I would like to bet on the Canadians that were working in solar and wind that you sold off from Suncor. I'd just like to address a couple of things before I move on.
Point of order?
I would welcome the member to come and actually tour an oil sands
That's not a point of order. That's an invitation.
Ms. Goodridge, as I've said, I've been to Fort Mac and I've toured an oil sands project.
We'll resume.
Which one?
Thank you.
Which oil sands company did you tour?
Yeah, I'm not actually.
Through the chair, please. That's why they say through the chair, so we don't get into arguments.
Thank you very much,
okay,
Mr. Chair.
So.
Well, thank you. I'd like to just resume by addressing some things that I've noticed on this committee today. There are members. I'm proud that every single MP can appear at a committee. I think it's really, really important. I find it disheartening that members who have oil and gas lobbyists in their families arrive here to have conversations with oil execs that their partners lobby. That's really, really challenging from an ethics perspective for me. I also have a challenge with Mr. Corson saying that there's been no impact.
Take a little point of time out for a point of order.
Yeah, can I just ask you a question?
Oh, Ms. Stubbs, sorry.
Yeah. What are the parameters within committee in case the member's getting very close to defamation, and which a tax lawyer and accountant might want to pursue?
Yeah,
you did. You said my husband earlier.
Just a second.
So we're not
That's an
play
interesting
game,
question,
right?
but
not say your husband.
Yeah, you did. You started off in your first round. No, and you talked about my husband.
Wasn't me.
It wasn't him. Oh, was it Patrick Weiler? Yes, you did.
I mean,
you said it. And it's on record. So, Chair, that's just my question.
What's your question?
If a tax lawyer,
yes,
who is also an accountant and a principal of a business, who was the silver medalist and clerked at the Tax Court of Canada, wrote many precedent decisions. If a member was here making comparisons or assertions about the person's role or job, what are the rules around whether or not those would be actionable?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'll have to
We'll
consult
follow later,
legal
maybe.
services, but let's just maybe maybe
Certainly, all
veer away from
are definitely proud of the groundbreaking, pioneering lifeline of investment to the Indigenous communities and all those local communities on that groundbreaking
let's stick
project.
to emissions. Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Those concerns remain. I also have concerns about some things that have been said on this committee. There is proven
You just said you
impacts
didn't say
from
those concerns.
There are proven impacts from Imperial Oil on the Athabasca River. That is irrefutable, Mr. Chair. Emissions from the oil and gas industry in Canada did not peak in 2017. They have continued to go up. And I'd also like to point out, it's kind of glossed over earlier, but some of these companies are actually lobbying against paying tolling fees on the pipeline, which will get their product to market. I have a question for Mr. Corson, because Mr. Corson, you said earlier that you'd like to put your money where your mouth is to reduce the carbon intensity of your operations. I think that's great. And again, I want to say that I want to bet on Canadians when it comes to both renewables and lowering the carbon intensity per barrel of Canadian oil and gas, because you're right, it does have a higher ESG focus than other places. But Mr. Kruger, if you could elaborate on this. I know that another big expenditure of oil and gas companies is advertising. There's legislation before the House to look into some of the advertising the oil and gas companies, public and government relations. Mr. Kruger, could you compare for us the approximate amount of money that is spent on decarbonization from Suncor and on advertising in public and government relations in your company?
Yeah, I would say this year we're probably spending several $100 million on decarbonization, and probably on advertising it's closer to maybe 10 million, something like that.
Only $10 million on advertising, public and government relations?
Yep, Canadians like our Petro-Canada sites, so they tend to go there.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well, Mr. Chair, I just want to state towards the end of my questioning here, I'm not sure when the timer was stopped. I 100% believe that Canada should continue to develop our exceptional energy reserves. I want to be proud of it. I'm on Team Canada, as it's been accused that I might not be. I'm 100% on Team Canada. I want to be proud of what natural resources we are able to get to market. But Canadians aren't proud of a product that is 7 times dirtier, 7 times more carbon intensive, that's contributing to more than 12% of Canada's total emissions. The oil sands in Canada are responsible for more emissions than the entire province of Ontario and the Ontario and Quebec combined. That's the daily activities and all the industry in both provinces. We've got a lot of work to do. And the oil sands, unfortunately, are headed in the wrong direction, as I pointed out earlier. Oil and gas emissions in the oil sands are going up, not down. And we need your help to get them down.
Time is up. Ms. Posé, on to you. 5 minutes? No, 2.5. Well, all right. First comment. Earlier, Mr. Cram asked a question, and the answer was that it would be better that Canadian oil be exported because we had proper regulation, but I did not hear anybody talk about this regulatory framework during the last 2 hours. My question is for Ms. Harridan from Enbridge. $10 million of your were invested by your company since 2002 in greener energy. So that's, or rather, billion, 10 billion. So that's about $5 million a year. That's not much. And then your site talks about projects that are currently being developed. Out of the 23 wind power parks and solar energy parks that are boasted by your company on its site, where are they? How many of them are in operation, and since when?
Well, I can provide you with the specific details afterwards, but they are across North America and offshore in Europe. So they range from here in Ontario down to Texas. The most recent is our Fox, and that's on the solar side, our Fox Squirrel assets that we added in Ohio. And just for clarity, that's $10 billion that we've invested since 2002 in renewable energy projects. In more recent years, and most recently, we've invested over $1 billion in renewable natural gas, where we'll take gas from landfills and capture that.
All right, I don't want to talk about renewable natural gas because that's another discussion altogether. I have a question for Mr. McKenzie. On your company's website, it says the objective is to reduce the emissions by 30 megatons by 2030 and to contribute significantly to Canada's goal of reducing emissions by 30%. The energy mix is a media in your sector. They say that the ambition is to have zero emissions and to increase by 30%. Is it a reduction of emissions or reductions of the intensity per barrels? Is it 30% or 30 megatons? Because it's not the same. Your time is up, unfortunately. On to Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's pretty disturbing to hear the lack of accountability from Imperial Oil to say that there's been no impact on the Athabasca River. The reality is that Imperial Curl Pond seeped 5.3 million liters of toxic waste into communities who already have disproportionately high rates of bile duct cancer. I sat down with the Mikisew Cree First Nation and heard stories about how they all have family members, friends who are diagnosed with cancer. It is deeply concerning to me. But I also want to take a moment just to note that Mrs. Stubbs talked about stopping the collusion between elected officials and CEOs. And we've heard accusations that her husband is a lobbyist for Enbridge and that she's now here asking questions to that same company. It seems like the Conservatives continue to run interference for their friends in Big Oil. They continue to cheerlead the fueling of the climate crisis. I'm just a little bit shocked from what I've heard both from the CEOs today and from Conservative MPs. It is time to tackle the climate crisis with the urgency and at the scale that matches the emergency that we are in. I want to just maybe give Imperial Oil a moment to speak to the impact that you've had on First Nations communities who have disproportionate rates of cancer in their community because of your tailing ponds.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to clarify what is a significant amount of misinformation that you and others have shared. The Curl seepage incident is very unfortunate, and I've appeared before this committee 2 times to talk about all of the actions that we are taking to mitigate that, all the actions we are taking to prevent its recurrence, and certainly the impacts to the Indigenous communities. However, we have significant data that demonstrates there has been no impact to the Athabasca River.
The Mikisew Cree First Nation have been asking for a health study for nearly 2 decades. If you felt some level of responsibility for the pollution that you're putting into the water, would you not fund that health study, or at least give them the funds to do an independent study of their own?
Time's up. We'll go to Mr. Deltel for 5.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je passe mon droit.
Thank you. I'm ceding my microphone to Mr. Major for 5.
The witnesses are coming out here today. This has been very engaged and emotional and passionate debate. I think everybody got their chance to have their say, and maybe we don't agree on a lot of different data points, but it was a very good discussion. And I think we have a lot better understanding of what's really going on with this industry, and especially when it comes to energy. there's an old saying that energy should not be idolized or demonized, and I'm kind of a firm believer of that. But what I'm asking the committee here, I would like to, there was a motion that was tabled on April 11th, so that notwithstanding the motion that was adopted on the committee on Thursday, April 11th, 2024, that we ask Scott G. Strauss, President of CNR, or Canadian Natural Resources Limited, Darlene Gates, CEO of MEG Energy, and Ryan Lance, CEO of ConocoPhillips, to appear for 1 hour at a future meeting. And the reason we're asking them is they are the other people that are missing from the Pathways Alliance. So I think this would complement the NDP's motion that was originally put on the table to talk about pathways. I don't think we had a good enough discussion about that today, honestly. And I don't know if any of the other committee members wanted to comment on that.
Sorry, Mr. Are you moving a motion?
Just amending that motion.
What motion are you amending?
The motion from April 11th.
Pardon?
The motion from April 11th.
Yeah, but you have to move that motion.
I tabled it. So I want to amend it now.
That's already passed.
I just want to amend that motion.
I'm getting.
And I'm just looking for UC is what I'm looking for.
Just a point of order. You can't amend an emotion that's already been passed.
So just a second. So which motion is this? This is.
You're right. You're right, Chair. So I'm asking for UC.
Okay. So the motion was never. Notice was given, but the motion was never tabled. Or moved, I should say.
Correct.
But I mean, it's not a very complicated matter. I mean, do we have UC to invite 5 more? Is it 5 more companies? 3 more companies?
3.
Do we have
UC?
UC?
To appear at an hour for a meeting in the future. So it's just open.
Do we have UC?
Yeah, I mean, in the future, we're not going to try and fit it in.
Yeah, we're not going to fit it. Yeah, but in principle, in the future, do we have agreement to invite 3 more companies?
Est-ce que les compagnies ont été...
Were the companies named? Can you please name them?
Yeah, I did.
They're the 3 other companies involved in Pathways.
Yeah.
We don't have this.
Un instant, Madame.
Natural Resources Limited.
Excusez-moi, Madame Châtel.
Sorry, onto Ms. Châtel. Yes. I see that there are oil companies in the world who have made massive investments in order to become a part of tomorrow's economy. I think that our companies are lagging. I'd like to invite a different perspective on top of those 3 companies.
We added BP to those 3, make it 4, and then we'll have UC.
They're not members of Pathways. That's the problem. We're just complementing this NDP motion.
They're not members of Pathways.
So you haven't really moved your motion. You were just asking for UC. Do we have UC to invite these 3 Madame Posey?
Before providing consent, I'd like to share some thoughts. There's a motion that is being studied. We'll have our 4th meeting on June 13th on sustainable finances, and then we'll have 5 more meetings afterwards. And I feel like we keep delaying everything, our work. Well, we're just talking about 3 more companies. I'm talking about our timeline. I kind of want us to finish what we're doing and, well, so you're afraid that it'll take away from our time that is already allotted.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it seems like this motion doesn't pick a date, so as long as we can do it after Madame Posey's study is over.
But it seems odd, given that our other colleagues and proponents here are so urgent about this issue and wanted these urgent answers. We're just trying to help remedy and contribute to the motion. It doesn't really make sense to talk about Pathways, not have all the companies represented, have other companies that are part.
We don't seem to have UC. We don't seem
it's very urgent for all of them to.
We don't seem to have UC.
Mr. Chair, point of order.
I think
like earlier in the meeting, we were discussing whether or not we had an extra 2.5 or 5 minutes for Mr. Morris, and it was like, oh, maybe we don't have enough time. But like now we're discussing this. This is a really good thing to discuss. Very important. But I think time and place. These are like 5, 6. Okay. 5 very, very busy CEOs.
Can we come back to this? Can we just finish this round and come back to it? Because we have some housekeeping matters to do. Can we do that? Because you haven't moved your motion. You haven't moved your motion.
I thought it was this timely because we have the Pathways
but we
conversation.
want to finish this round of questioning so we can let the witnesses go. but anyway, so I think we're going to move.
Can I just move it and be done with it? I think we're in agreement of it.
I don't think there's an agreement. That's the thing.
Okay.
Okay. So I think now we're going to go. I think we're going to go now to the last 5 minutes of this round, and then we'll let the witnesses go, and we can revisit this idea. Okay. So, Madame Châtel, je pense que vous partagez avec Madame Taylor-Roy.
Ms. Châtel, you're going to be splitting your time with Ms. Taylor-Roy for the last 5 minutes, correct? Yes. This question is for Ms. Pierce. I know that Shell did a 180 on its climate commitments. Shell was selling these credits to the tune of $200 million, and then the commitment for reducing emissions by 2035 was abandoned, which of course discredited them. Shell also recently announced that it would be sharing, or rather selling, a part of its wallet to focus on fossil fuels. And so what proof can you give to the committee to demonstrate that you are indeed engaged in the fight against climate change and that you wish to invest with us, with provincial governments, with the provincial government, with taxpayer money in order to help decarbonize your industry and company? Ms. Pierce.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. We have a very clear energy transition strategy, and we do have very clear targets, which I mentioned before. Specifically, when you think about our scope 1 and 2, so the emissions that we emit when we produce energy, or the emissions that are caused by procuring things like power, we've made a commitment to reduce that by 50% by 2030. We're at 60% of the way there. Uniquely also, we do have a scope 3 target. Scope 3 is the customer's emissions. So the emissions that if you buy petroleum from our station, you would emit those emissions. We have a commitment to reduce the carbon intensity of that scope 3, again, 15 to 20% by 2030. We also have a commitment to reduce 15 to 20% absolute by 2030.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Other than words,
yes,
to say, but we look forward for more action. I'll cede my time to Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you to the witnesses. And I just want to be clear, you spoke of a lot of good in answering the questions opposite on how you have helped Indigenous communities near where you operate. And I noticed that even though this hearing, this meeting was not about investments in Indigenous communities, you had all those numbers, but you didn't have any numbers on your investments in net zero. So I do, as a very profitable sector of our economy, undoubtedly you've done a lot of good. And I think Canadians thank you. Many, many jobs have been created. There's been much good done, and you've helped your communities. But it's not that we're questioning. It's the fact that for 50 years, we've known that the product that you produce is contributing to the climate crisis. And so, given that you've done a lot of good, it seems now there's a lot of prevarication around what should be done, when it should be done, waiting for a framework. You're all able to begin investing now much more in emissions reductions. You collectively make up 31% of emissions in Canada, and you're less than 5% of the GDP. Most of the money goes outside of this country.
Yeah, that's right.
We have our commitments as a country, and you're a part of that economy. So what are you going to do? And I would like, again, to hear from you that you will table the plans that you and your boards have approved to get to net zero, including current and planned investments going forward. Thank you.
Is that a question or just to reiterate?
No, I'd like to hear from that we're going to table those.
I understand, but it's also reiterating the request to send a follow-up documentation that answers Ms. Taylor-Roy's question. But who would like to take a stab at that question?
Well, Mr. Chair, I would just comment that we have already provided our Advancing Climate Solutions report to the entire committee. And if you study that report, it lays out a clear roadmap of the investments we have made and we have planned. And as an example of ones we have made, We are building right now Canada's largest renewable diesel facility that will result in significant reduction in Scope 3 emissions. I also commented we just started up and announced first production from a new operation at our Cold Lake that uses the latest technology employing solvents to reduce the greenhouse gas intensity of those barrels by 40%. So I use that just to illustrate two examples of many that are on our roadmap.
I appreciate the examples, but what I asked for were detailed plans to get to net zero, to meet your goals of 2030 and 2050, not two examples. Your emissions are still going up. We'd like to see the plans, please.
Our time is up, but this is a request that the committee is making towards each and every one of you, which is to provide us with written information that details your plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We will stop there. I'd like to thank you for having joined us for this discussion, which was quite robust at times. I think that you have provided us with a lot of knowledge on this issue. So thank you very much, and have a good evening. And perhaps we will see each other on another occasion, but thank you for having been here tonight.
Colleagues, I just have a couple of housekeeping things to take care of. So we adopted a motion, Mr. Mazier's motion, to have a meeting on the 11th of June on net zero with a 2-hour meeting, but 1 hour in camera. We agreed that certain documents would be made certain confidential documents would be made available for consultation at a location to be determined. It looks like it's going to be hard to amass all of these documents by the 11th. So what is being proposed, and I discussed this with Mr. Mazier, is that we do that meeting not on the 11th but on the 18th. So we're just delaying a week so that we make sure we have all the documents. Is everyone? I can't imagine anyone disagreeing with that. So it means a 2-hour meeting on the 11th and a 4-hour meeting on the 18th, rather than a 4-hour meeting on the 11th and a 2-hour meeting on the 18th. It's just on décale d'une semaine.
So we're delaying by a week. That's all. Are we all in agreement? Fantastic.
Clarification. So we have, with the kind of guaranteed, the indication was we want to make sure we have this meeting before we take off for the summer, right? So 18th is kind of the do or die date. So do we have the resources?
We're working on it. I think I'm hopeful that we do.
Because the understanding we have, so everybody knows, is on the same page. If we do have votes that day, the meeting will start, say, at 4 o'clock or start later. So if we have to go through votes, so we can't, oh, well, we're voting all through this, right? So it's going to make the greatest possible extent to make sure this meeting.
L'objectif, c'est
the goal is to settle this by the 18th, even if we start late, and then we will have to make sure that resources are available.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. It's a good idea. One thing we need to address now that it's on the same day is the plan then to view documents for 2 hours.
My understanding is that, and this is why it's being delayed to the 18th, because I think the motion said the documents should be available 3 days before. Is that what it was? Yes. Yeah. So we've been told, or I've been told, that by making it the 18th, we can make the documents available.
Okay, I understand that. It wasn't my question. Oh. My question is, there was discussion last time about whether or not we want to view the documents before or after we have witnesses. Does this mean that we will be viewing documents in the first 2 hours of the meeting and then having our regularly scheduled meeting afterwards? Because that would flip the viewing and the meeting around.
My understanding was we would have 1 hour with, I guess, the witnesses, and then 1 hour in camera with the documents. Is that correct?
Yeah, meanwhile, we have 2 days.
And meanwhile, 2 days to consult the documents before the meeting.
Before the meetings even happen. We have access to the documents 3 days before the actual meeting.
But we're going to get access to the documents on the 18th. Is that what this is?
No, earlier, 3 days before.
Oh, on the 15th?
If we want, you can consult.
Okay, so the 11th wasn't an option, so that now we're suggesting that we can have the documents available on the 14th or the 15th
Something
or something
like that, yeah, 13th, 14th.
Okay, so then why would we have a
14th.
4-hour meeting on the 18th if we're going to be
Because
viewing documents?
we have a regularly scheduled 2-hour meeting to finish up the water study. The idea was always to add this 2-hour meeting on the net zero accelerator on top of another meeting. We were going to do it Monday on top of another meeting. It was always a question of adding 2 hours to an existing meeting. That's what the motion said. We're good? Yes.
Just for clarification, do you mind repeating the dates that the meetings are going to be extended? Is it just the 18th, or was there another date?
No, just the 18th.
Just the 18th. And you said to wrap up the water study, but my understanding is that we had the minister coming. He wasn't able to come.
I apologize. You're absolutely right. The minister's coming the 18th.
Thank you.
The water study is being wrapped up the 11th. Thank you for that.
Is the minister coming first? Right?
Yes, he's coming for the first 2 hours. Then we go into the net zero accelerator for 2 hours. And then that'll be it.
Should be exciting.
And just for clarity, though, we're not adding any time in terms of a meeting for viewing documents, but that will be like a 1 or 2 hour period in an office somewhere.
Yeah.
In this block.
Yeah. That
not like not like this.
No,
not
that's to be determined. Yeah, that's to be determined. We're good.
So is it 3:30 to 7:30 then on the 15th or the 18th rather?
That's the plan.
That's the plan. Right
That's
now.
the plan.
And just for consideration with colleagues present, we have in the past just voted through the meeting. If we can do that, then we'll be able to have a 4-hour meeting and not a 6-hour meeting.
That's perfect.
And what I was worried about is we couldn't gavel in, right? Like, so, as we get voting, right? So we want to make sure the meeting starts and then away we go.
Yeah, if we're in the meeting when the voting starts, we'll take 5 minutes each time and vote. And
on this issue of confidentiality, I know that there's big consequences if the information get leaked. I don't personally intend to be there. I don't want, if something happened, my name to be associated with it. But you suggested, Adam, last time that there was a briefing on consequences of a leak in that. So no, it's not allowed. But if it happened, there's a very severe consequences.
tell you what, we'll come back. We'll consult the clerk, and she'll tell us at the next meeting what the consequences are if we leak confidential information. Can you do that for us? Yeah, thank you. Anything else? No? Okay, have a good weekend, colleagues.
Thank
We'll
you,
see you
Chair.
next week.
Thank you, everyone.